Now, next up, it is my pleasure to welcome virtually on the stage Professor Ama Browne Klutse. She unfortunately couldn't be here today with us in person, but we're going to hear a greeting from her, and we're going to look at the question, is it time for a paradigm shift? Thank you.
So I said that it's important to do a lot more research in this field because it's still new. People do not understand it yet. Even within the scientific community, even within the climate community, it's new. So more research is important for people to understand. And if you're able to do policy briefs for government and policy makers to also get to know what it is, the new area of thinking, it will help. Exactly. The civil society have, I would say, a very big role to play in this because their voices go really far. First, they must understand what it is, what the situation is, and then they should understand their position on this, their role to play in the society. So I believe once they understand what this intervention is all about, they will be encouraged to advocate in that direction for mitigation of the climate change. All they need is the understanding of what we are trying to do. So we need to get them involved as much as possible on every step on the way, so they will be able to take it up and advocate for it as much as possible. Yes, so even in the SIT assessment report, we had introduced the geoengineering. And so in the 7th assessment report, as this topic is becoming more advanced and clearer to people, we believe we'll get some publications, a lot more publications in the area. You know, the IPCC doesn't conduct research from scratch on its own. It takes the information out there and reports same to government. So it depends on what the community puts out there. The IPCC will pick it up and also project it same to the various governments. So we should encourage ourselves to do more research in this area, and then it will be a loud voice in the IPCC as well. Thank you.
So that was again Professor Ama Browne Klutse. She is the vice president of the first working group of the IPCC, and she's also right now researching solar climate intervention in Ghana. So happy that we could get her at least in video format. Next up, we are going forward to a panel. And we are going to welcome to the stage to discuss with the two of them from Moderator Arctis, Anton Keskinen, and from Arctic Center, University of Lapland, Professor John Moore. Welcome. Take it away.
Thank you, Anni, and thank you, Pekka, very much for having us here. So maybe I should start introducing you, or maybe myself first. I'm Anton, I'm from Moderator Arctis, and that's that. But you are John Moore, a British scientist, chief scientist and research professor working at the University of Lapland. You knew that already, right? So, okay. John is a member of the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters, as well as 6 Antarctic, 4 Greenlandic and 20 Svalbard scientific expeditions. John led the Chinese geoengineering research program from 2015 to 2022. And at the moment, you are mainly researching methods to actively conserve the cryosphere, especially the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, right?
Yes, that's right. I've done a lot of research on things, the traditional style of geoengineering, but that's kind of a little bit difficult from the governance angle. You have to get so many countries to agree on things. One of the advantages of working with the ice sheets is that they are much more regionally confined, so you can do things with a smaller group of countries.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We have this quite big question time for a paradigm shift that we should discuss now for a couple of minutes. Maybe we could start from the field of from your field of expertise, which is this ice sheet conservation. So when it comes to ice sheets, are these huge ice masses on land. So when they melt, they will rise to sea level. And when it comes to the West Antarctic ice sheet, you've one time described that the survival of some of the most vulnerable glaciers are actually already disconnected from what's happening in the atmosphere. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, yeah, the point is that throughout the Industrial Revolution and our emissions of greenhouse gases, most of the heat has been captured by the oceans. So more than 90% of the total amount of heat. And of course, that's an enormous reservoir that is just sitting there, and it's very difficult to get rid of that. There's no kind of equilibrium, fast process that can do this sort of thing to reach a steady state. Parts of the ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, for example, it's sitting on a seabed that is below the present sea level. So if you remove the ice sheet, there would just be a few islands sticking up above the surface of the ocean.
So they are holding up the ice sheet, or?
Well, the ice sheet is perhaps 3 kilometers thick, but maybe 2 kilometers of that is below the present sea level. So the enormous weight of the ice is pressing down on the bed. But what that is that the sea floor is sloping in towards the middle of the ice sheet. So as the ice is retreating, more and more of it is exposed to the warm water at its edges. And that's like the ball rolling down the hill, that it's an inherently unstable situation. And once you start that ball rolling down the hill, it doesn't really matter what the temperature of the air is. You have to physically try to prop up the ice sheet. And, well...
How could it be done? Any ideas? What's the plan?
Yeah, well, you see, the big problem is that the warm water has accelerated the melting underneath the floating parts of the ice shelves, they're called, which are usually a few hundred meters thick, maybe a kilometer thick when they start to float from the edge of the ice sheet. The melting that can occur from the seawater is much more fast than from the air. So you can get melt rates of 50 meters per year because you have seawater, and of course when you get in a bath, you know you cool down a lot faster in ice-cold water than you do in the air. And the same thing, the ice melts so much more effectively in contact with water than the air. So this is the thing, that the air can maybe melt about 1 meter per year, but the ocean is doing things 10, 20, 50 times faster. So you need to do something about that warm ocean water. Try and keep it away. And we're actually quite lucky that the ice sheets drain through things like the plug hole in a bathtub. They flow through these narrow, fast-flowing ice streams. So if you can do something about those ice streams, you don't need to worry about the vast majority of the inland ice. So you just need to keep this warm water away from the vulnerable parts where it's exiting.
Some certain points.
Yeah, there's literally a handful of these places in Greenland and another handful in Antarctica. So that's the thing that gives you such enormous leverage. You don't need to deal with this continental-sized problem. You can just deal with things that they're big, of course, but they're of the order of tens of kilometers across rather than tens of thousands of kilometers like the whole coastline of Antarctica or Greenland. So it's a more manageable kind of intervention.
Right, and so if we are to intervene with the collapsing of the West Antarctic ice sheet, we could try to plug these narrow ways that bring the warm water under the glaciers and the ice sheet. But what happens if we don't do this?
Well, this is the point that once you've started the ball rolling down the hill, this is an excellent analogy for this, it will stop. We don't have this control of the thermostat anymore to prevent that. The only thing that you could try to do is maybe gracefully deal with this amount of sea level rise. But the thing is, we know the total amount of sea level, roughly. We're talking 3 or 4 meters of global sea level that is locked up in these unstable glaciers. But
that means if the ice sheet's gone, the sea levels will rise.
That's the global average, 3 or 4 meters, yes. But we don't know, does it take 200 years? Does it take 300 years? These things are kind of slow in the human lifetime, but we are still talking in this century of something like 1 meter of sea level rise from Antarctica.
And that's bad.
Yeah, because most of the sea level rise, the sea doesn't respond like the water in a bathtub. Unfortunately, it always seems to be the case that the global south gets the worst of the deal. Though the tropical areas are where sea level is going to rise more than the global average.
Because we are losing the gravitational sort of element of the ice sheets.
Yes. So you've got less ice sucking the seawater closer to it.
Yeah.
And also, you tend to find that the coastlines have a much higher sea level rise than the middle of the ocean, which is, of course, unfortunate because everybody lives on the coastline rather than the middle of the ocean.
Correct. If I remember correctly, yes. Yes. Okay, so what should I ask? So often people criticize climate interventions or even talking about this in the fears, or should I say like valid concerns that it will interfere with the process of green transition and cutting emissions and zeroing emissions essentially. And that's the very important work we have to do, is to get emissions down. And I greatly applaud to everybody who's doing that. And I know there's a lot of friends and colleagues here who are working on that. And by the way, I want to congratulate Eurokapina for receiving a huge grant for this work. So great job. I love you guys. And at the same time, what we have been talking about is that the sea level rise, if we don't halt it, it will require immense building of pumping systems and flood walls, just as Anni said, even relocating entire cities, and that will cost like $40 billion a year or something like this. You have to calculate it.
It's been budgeted that 1 meter of sea level rise will cost $40 billion per year to maintain the coastal sea level defenses around the world.
Yes, and even if you wouldn't be concerned about people having to use a lot of money, there's a lot of places where there is no money to do that.
Exactly.
The most vulnerable places, people don't have the resources to relocate rice fields, relocate their homes.
Yes, this is a terribly undemocratic and unjust way of dealing with this kind of crisis. It's much better for everybody if we can try to conserve the ice sheets. And this is the point, that if we do nothing, they will go away, or some of them will go away. So you have to actually take action. It's conservation by action, by doing, rather than saying hands off. We now have to say, we need to get everybody's hands on, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And with the Greenland ice sheet, it's more dependent on what's happening in the atmosphere, or am I correct? And thus, it's related to the losing of the sea ice. Or...
Yeah. Of course, as the Arctic Ocean warms up around it, then yes, there's more warm air that will be melting the surface of Greenland. There is still the warm water as well that is creating some of the ice sheet retreat. It's about 50-50 at the moment. In 100 years' time, the ice sheet might be considerably smaller and further away from the coast. And the problem is that as the melting occurs, this accelerates because it's less high, it's sitting in the warmer, lower atmosphere and melting more and more each year.
That's the elevation feedback.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, yes, while I just want to emphasize that we have to keep on fighting for system change and cutting emissions, zeroing them as soon as possible and getting into the negative emission regime or era. But Anni was talking about this paradigm shift or need for paradigm change, coming from the idea that we should just keep on cutting emissions and hope for the best, to maybe start to think about these interventions, whether it's the ice sheet conservation project you are doing, or whether it's solar radiation management stuff that we're going to hear more.
Yeah,
I
think
what do you think about this?
It's absolutely key that we start to recognize these parts of the cryosphere as global goods. This is something that benefits the whole planet. Everybody needs to keep the permafrost frozen and the ice sheets and the sea ice as stable as possible. But they're not valued, and the indigenous peoples are not given the credit for the stewardship that they can and could do even better in the future. So we need to have mechanisms globally enacted that will provide funds to allow these kind of interventions, because we're not talking about the poor people in Bangladesh or the 56,000 Greenlanders. It has to be from the polluters should pay for this, but it's a benefit for them. To protect the West Antarctic ice sheet, we estimate would cost about $50 billion, or about the cost of 1 year's damage if you let it go. So it's not only benefiting like the local inhabitants in Greenland, it's actually benefiting the rich guys in condos in Miami or wherever they are around the world.
The guys who should pay for this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just as you said. Yeah, I agree on that. I totally agree on that.
No, we need some radical changes in the economics so that the taxes reflect the kinds of damage that is done by burning fossil fuels, of course.
Yes, radical change in economics sounds good for me. And this is just another point where we could start to see these climate interventions as complementing to the emission reduction agenda and the whole transition.
Yes, everybody agrees that we have to get to net zero and actually suck the stuff out of the atmosphere. But having as many arrows in your quiver as possible, it is the best option to prevent catastrophe, really.
Let's leave it there. Thank you very much, John. Thanks.